HTTV in association with Absolute Warehouse Services. Oggy, thank you for joining us in what is a very unusual time at the moment. How are you and your family doing?
It's good of you to ask, Adam, and thanks, guys, for having me on. I'm doing okay, thank goodness. So are my family. We're managing to spin homeschooling with home athletics, not too much Xbox, not too much viewing of the Huddersfield Town YouTube channel, on which there's a lot of great retro stuff. But, you know, there are greater things going on, Adam. We all know that.
Yeah.
And yes, we're missing the match day adrenaline. We're missing the sharing of the match day experience and watching Danny Cowley and the team. But the heroes at the moment, I think, all work for the NHS, as we well know. So we're just applauding their efforts and hoping to stay safe for the duration.
Absolutely, 100%. Their efforts don't go amiss. They're doing a fantastic job. What have you been doing on a Saturday then? Obviously not at the John Smith Stadium.
No, I mean, the rest of my working week is actually very normal because, of course, more than half of my job is full up north. And that is a half-hour television programme that still gets churned out every night, to their real credit. Saturdays, I have to try and be an attentive husband and a good dad. And like every other bloke across Huddersfield, do all those jobs that I've been putting off for about 5 years in some cases. I'm having a spin on my bike when time allows, Adam. You wouldn't be surprised to hear me say that.
Yeah.
But actually trying to relax in anticipation of, we hope, a great explosion of activity if and when the season is allowed to resume. That's not a bad thing to do. So I'm keeping myself busy, but trying to keep some perspective on things as well.
100%, exactly the right thing to do. We thought, Oggy, we'd catch up with you because you are the voice of Huddersfield Town, to find out what your top 5 memories or have been reporting on the club, your top 5 games. Do you want to give us your first one?
Well, there'll be many more than 5 if you actually pinned me down and made a list with me, Adam. But I'll warn you now that not every single one of my most powerful memories in the privileged position of covering Huddersfield Town that I've got are positive ones. Some of them have been negative events. A relegation springs to mind, which I'll get to. Match number 1, definitely, though, would be my first visit to Wembley covering Huddersfield Town, and that is the League One playoff final in 2012, the penalty shootout against Sheffield United.
Talk to us about what that was like for you. Obviously, the penalty shootout going on for so long. When you're broadcasting, what's that like? How do you paint that picture?
There are all sorts of memories from that day, guys, which I'll share with you as a human being, never mind the professional capacity that I was there in. The first thing that any of us would remember from that day is the sheer amazing, searing heat of it. I think it is the hottest conditions that I've ever commentated on a football match in. We were up around the 80s. I remember it was a day when lots of Huddersfield Town and Sheffield United support actually didn't even get to see the match, or saw very little of it, because of catastrophic problems on the roads on the way down to Wembley. People were still seeping into the stadium during the penalty shootout itself. Wow. Those of us who'd been there all afternoon were drenched in sweat. And in all seriousness, I did suffer a very mild form of heat exhaustion. You've got to remember that even just for the match itself, you're talking almost non-stop for literally 2 hours, which in those temperatures is actually quite a physical achievement in the first place. The tension, the adrenaline, the excitement, and the usual obligation to try my very best and deliver a clear picture of what's going on to the audience back home that couldn't see it was quite a challenge. And I really suffered at times from dehydration during and definitely towards the end of the commentary. So the conditions were one thing, but right from the beginning of the day, guys, the emotion of it almost got the better of me on several occasions. The first time of which was when Peter Clark led the team out. If you listen really carefully, you'll hear me gulp away a big lump in my throat. And it wasn't me just being self-indulgent. I felt the sense of occasion in my own heart, because I'd got to the point after even 12 or 13 years of covering Huddersfield Town where I never really expected to see us at Wembley. and suddenly Lee Clark had started to put together that unbeaten run. We got there at Old Trafford initially, and then eventually in this playoff final against Sheffield United the following season. And to see such a nice guy like Peter Clark lead such a likeable team out onto the hallowed turf of Wembley was quite a moment for me as well.
Yeah, 100%. And then obviously the penalties for you. Was it hard to control that emotion when we finally won it? Like, because it had been on so long.
Initially, it wasn't hard to control any emotion at all because we missed our first 2 or 3, didn't we?
Yeah,
and I
well,
think halfway through the penalty shootout initially, we had all started to assume that we were going to be going home soon and we'll be playing League One football again. And then this amazing turnaround, thanks to Alex Smithies in goal at first, and then some really well-taken penalties, Jack Hunt and others. They started to deliver, Jordan Rhodes, when it really mattered. And that amazing, unprecedented end, when we'd gone all the way through the available outfield players and the 2 goalkeepers ended up taking pot shots at each other. I felt sorry for some of the Sheffield United guys because in my capacity as a Look North reporter, I'd got to know some of them well. But the affection that we had for some of the guys like Gary Roberts, Alan Lee and the team, Jack Hunt I've mentioned already, you could go right through the team. And then Alex Smithies himself, a homegrown, very cherished member of the squad from such a local location, for him to seal it with that penalty and then to watch Simonson's kick go sailing over his head. The emotion from the owner, from Simon Grayson, from the fans who are in the stadium at Wembley, and from all of us in the commentary box, we had to try our best to keep a lid on it as well because it meant so much to the whole town.
Yeah, 100%. What's your second game?
The second game, yeah, I've done them in order, in my own heart. The second match is actually from the season before, and it's one of the most dramatic matches I've ever covered in all the 20 years or so as Huddersfield Town commentator, and that is the semi-final second leg against Bournemouth. Before we got to Old Trafford in the final and were beaten by Peterborough, we'd drawn 1-1 at Bournemouth in the first leg. The second leg went to extra time, 3-3 and at the end of extra time, and then the penalty shootout won by Anthony Kay. Probably the loudest and most passionate atmosphere generated by home fans before we got into the Premier League that I can ever remember.
Yeah, it was an incredible moment, wasn't it? You could really see how the whole town had got behind the team.
And this is when Sean Jarvis and the commercial team really had started to show that they got their teeth into the interaction between the team on the field and the team off the field, frankly, which was the fans themselves. We had cardboard clapping devices by then. There was a lot more natural generation of noise from the terraces than we'd seen before. And, you know, that sight of Dean Hoyle embracing people on the touchline, for the team to create what I seem to remember was a 2-1 lead during normal time, only to be pegged back and go 3-2 down in extra time. If memory serves, it was Danny Ings that scored Bournemouth's goal to take them 3-2 ahead. And then Anthony Kay scored again in outfield play from another fantastic Gary Roberts delivery. And we went into penalties. And that's when the character of the team, the self-belief of the team really started to show through. And Lee Clark's entrusting of the players, that empowerment that we talk about these days under Danny Cowley. I think Lee Clark was an early pioneer of that because he got the players to believe in themselves and get themselves over the line and into that penalty shootout. And the panache with which they took the penalties really overshadowed Bournemouth. Anthony Kay's winning penalty being the best illustration of that I can remember.
Game 3, what have you got for us?
Game 3 is a game that people remember across Yorkshire at the end of our first season in the Championship. And that is that ridiculous, and I mean ridiculous in the kindest way, 2-2 draw against Barnsley on the final day of the
Yeah.
championship season. Mark Robbins' team and or Barnsley themselves could have gone down on the day. We went into the roller coaster of emotions that is always the case watching Huddersfield Town just during that game itself, because we went behind to Chris O'Grady's goal. We fought back through Jermaine Beckford and James Vaughan, during which we were 2-1 down. And then the shared celebrations at the end from the Town and Barnsley fans, and the shared journey home celebrating the preservation of championship status is something that no one could ever forget.
When the team stopped playing, from a commentary perspective, how do you fill that silence?
As usual, Adam, we just had to describe what we saw.
Yeah.
But what we couldn't believe quite is what we were seeing with our own eyes and having to describe with our own mouths down the microphone, because it was another unprecedented event in Huddersfield Town history. The same for Barnsley, of course. Yeah. But I do remember Luke Steele, the Barnsley keeper on the day, with the ball at his feet, looking over to the Barnsley bench for instructions from David Flitcroft, their manager, as to what to do. And the Town players, who instinctively might have closed down, gone to try and fish the ball away from Luke Steele, also looking round to try and work out what the reason for all the emotion on the terraces was. It was absolute chaos. And for a Manchester lad like Mark Robbins in charge of Town, and a Lancashire lad like Flitcroft in charge of Barnsley on the day, to be sharing in those chants of Yorkshire towards the end, and we are staying up. It was something that I'd never expect to see again in a stadium. There were some fairly unkind accusations from elsewhere in the division that it had been fixed, of course, and that Town and Barnsley hadn't taken the match over the line in the right way. But having seen it with my own eyes, there was never any idea of collaboration. And I'll tell you why, because it was clear to us as professional observers that very few people in those dying seconds knew exactly what was going on, because of the confusion of information that was coming from results elsewhere in the division, what the direct consequences of that were, and what the players should do in accordance with the confused information that was being passed around the stadium. It was just bedlam, chaos, and absolutely gripping, because we in the commentary box were trying to work out what the players were responding to before we described it. But the players on the field definitely earned their status back in the Championship, because Barnsley gave as good as they got. They came to our place with players full of character, Perkins, the two guys who scored the goals, O'Grady, who was always a thorn in Town's side, Scotland. They were a really good Barnsley team. The fans made a match of it, but the emotion that we put into it as well, with Beckford and Vaughan and all the panache of the Town team, that really made it a special occasion. And it's a match which would probably rank in my own top 3, never mind top 5.
The emotion at the end was special, wasn't it? The connection between the Huddersfield Town fans and the Barnsley fans, just singing together. That's what football's all about, isn't it? That spirit between supporters, obviously the pure elation in staying in the league, but to see two sets of football fans combine into one single moment, it's really powerful.
It was powerful and a really positive experience for us. I don't think that emotion would have been shared, Adam, by a lot of the fans of the other teams that were caught in the mess at the bottom of that division on the same day. But I agree with you. It was a moment to be proud of for both Huddersfield and Barnsley, and the way that the fans went about supporting their teams. Because as somebody who's been a comer-inner to Huddersfield, though I've lived in Huddersfield and worked in the town for a very long time myself now, I can always see the town objectively. And I've always thought that the local rivalry between Huddersfield and Barnsley has been a bit underplayed over the years, because they're two towns that almost border each other. I find myself in Barnsley for professional and mountain biking reasons, even today. So, it's a place that I feel very close to. So I'm always as excited about a Huddersfield-Barnsley derby as I am for derbies between Huddersfield Town and certain other local rivals that might spring to mind. But that's just a personal observation. I think that the two towns are very similar, and they showed it on the same day, in the way that they shared that experience of preserving the championship status.
Game 4, what have you got for us?
Game 4 is the tricky one, guys, because this was an early, very powerfully negative emotional experience for me in the commentary box, which I was only just ready for. And you're going to probably need a bit longer memory than some to have experienced the emotion on the day, but it is the stuff of legend in the time since. It was the final day of the 2001 season, after Steve Bruce had lost his job and been replaced by one of his co-assistants, Lou Macari. Lou Macari had done a good job of steadying the ship. We had Andy Booth back in the building, signed again from Sheffield Wednesday. But Town, on the final day of the season, unfortunately, were the victim of circumstances elsewhere on the final day of fixtures, where not a single result that we were hoping for positives from went Town's way. And I'm thinking of Fulham, I'm thinking of Barnsley, who lost at Portsmouth, if memory serves. Crystal Palace and Stockport went the wrong way for us, and Town themselves were beaten at home by Birmingham City by 2-1. And all of those results meant that Town were relegated in unbearable fashion on the final day of the season.
Like you said, you were at this point very early in terms of Huddersfield Town and commentary. When that experience happens on air with the fans in interviews, how do you have to change in terms of tone, making sure that you get the right messages across?
It's an interesting question, that, Adam, because in many ways your behaviour doesn't change that much, and certainly the job you're supposed to do shouldn't change that much, because, you know, the BBC values stand firm: accuracy, clarity of thought in dramatic circumstances when the adrenaline is flowing is sometimes more difficult to achieve. But one thing that actually helped me on the day, believe it or not, is, bearing in mind we're in the early noughties here, 2001, I could see from the immediate raw emotion of the fans around us in the stadium, who were listening to us and other radio stations on the transistors, literally pressed to their ears. There were people whose facial expressions were changing by the minute as the events unfolded in front of us on the field. Town couldn't claw back a result, ended up losing 2-1 to Birmingham City. But as confirmation of final scores came in from elsewhere, people really started to burst into tears as the stark, horrible realisation started to kick in that Town were going to be relegated. It was almost like a fiver or more valuable note in the wind that's blowing away from you and you're chasing it down the street. It was a catastrophic set of events that you just couldn't control, and that lack of control was illustrated by people's expressions and body language in the crowd around us. Even members of the bench and Lou Macari's staff were looking up at us for confirmation as to what was going on elsewhere. And though worse things can happen, and we should always be mindful of that, that horrible feeling that uncontrollably your team is going to be relegated and is being relegated with every second that passes was almost something tangible. You could feel it, and the tears went on for quite a long time afterwards. Lou Macari himself wouldn't mind me sharing with you the fact that he sobbed in his post-match interview. So did Barry Rubery, because for all the things that had gone wrong on and off the field in 2 years and more that had preceded that catastrophic final day, you still felt that Town didn't deserve that much of a kick in the teeth, and it affected the Town and the economy around the football team for quite a long time after that.
Perfect. And finally, number 5.
I'm not going to even ask you to guess. Of course, the 2017 playoff final and the penalty shootout against Reading. Different climatic circumstances to back in 2012. It was an overcast day. It was cold, but we had built such an emotional momentum behind David Wagner on the way to Wembley, with that semi-final and the beautiful way that Town had been managed on the field by Wagner against Sheffield Wednesday over the 2 legs of that semi. There was a feeling of positivity that I think drove Town into and away from Wembley on the day. Because for all the time that Town couldn't score a goal during the match against Reading in normal play and in extra time, we never seemed to lose that feeling that we were going to win. And it's easy to be wise after. And I say that with a slight apology to Reading fans, but I always felt we were a better team than them on the day. Though once we got onto the field and the kickoff started and we went into the commentary, I seem to remember realising loud and openly on air in the opening seconds of the commentary, I think I said, this is it. One of these teams is going to be playing the Premier League next season. And I hardly could believe it myself as I was describing it. Within minutes of that, the miss of the season by Izzy Brown. How did he miss that chance? I still will never know to this day. But once we got over that hurdle, though it kept nagging at the back of my mind, I just hoped and prayed during the commentary that moment and the miss by Izzy wouldn't come back to haunt us. I still felt that we had the better of Reading psychologically, and we had the expertise and the character on the bench. And with Wagner and Bula and Andy Hughes' craft in the coaching room, I always felt that we were going to edge it, and we did.
We were obviously sat across from you in that game in the press box, and I don't know what you were thinking, but even when Michael Hefele missed, there was something inside that told us Danny Ward will save a penalty. And then obviously Schindler's penalty and the magnificent celebrations. I don't know if that was the same for you.
I felt some similarities, Adam, because I think Danny Ward's performance at Hillsborough in the semi-final against Sheffield Wednesday to get us to Wembley and face Reading, it was like a joker that we could always play, a card that we already had up our sleeve if we needed it. And Danny Ward's part in that promotion shouldn't be underestimated, should it? But I'll say this since you brought it up, Adam. I struggled with Izzy Brown's miss. I really did. But when Michael Hefele missed that penalty in the shootout, and the sight of poor Hef with his head buried in the turf, punching the ground, I seem to remember him slamming his fist against the Wembley turf. That is an image that I've not shaken off yet, even after all this time. Just like the 2012 Wembley penalty shootout against Sheffield United, we had to go through some pain and agony to get to the joy at the end. And honestly, when Hefele missed, I thought, this is it. It's over. Our hearts have been broken because if there's one player you wanted to play a positive role in Huddersfield Town's promotion, it was Michael Hefele because of how he is as a bloke. And I mean, he's still like that at Nottingham Forest. Now we've lost him. But he was almost the in-house cheerleader of that team. And he played with such composure as a defender during the two semis, the low-scoring double-headed semi against Sheffield Wednesday. He'd helped keep Reading out at Wembley. I think that was Michael Hefele at his professional best so far, and I hope we see more of it. You wanted him to score that penalty, and when he didn't, I thought, it's all going to finish now. But, and if you listen carefully to my commentary, the emotion and the exhaustion got the better of me because I misidentified one of the Reading penalty takers. Who cares? He missed anyway. It could have been more. It might have been a beater. I might have got on the wrong way around. If you listen carefully and you look at the players, I definitely got something wrong in there. But that's because I was looking at most of it through spliced fingers. I was just waiting for the moment after Hefele's miss. And then suddenly a save from Danny Ward and one blaze over the bar by Reading. And Schindler, typically workmanlike, no messing. When it came to Schindler having the whole of Town's status in his hands, he didn't mess about. There was barely any time for me to draw breath. The noise was building. I knew that we had a slight imbalance on our microphones. Another thing you can listen to a bit more carefully if you're into broadcasting technology. We had a bit too much crowd noise on anyway. My voice was running out of power. And you can hear the sound drown out my description of Schindler's winning penalty. I think we just about got there in the end. But who cares what Oggy was saying? We were all celebrating and hugging each other anyway. And that includes me. and Matt Glennon in the commentary box. It was an unforgettable moment, but what an execution by Christopher Schindler. It was just fabulous.
Absolutely. Oggy, thank you for joining us. Those 5 memories, I'm sure, will be fond and for the right reasons, and one for not so much the right reasons, but still a memorable and important time in Huddersfield Town's history. Thank you very much for sharing those with us.
My pleasure.